In this video, I'll be showing you how to use the API view in Django REST Framework so that you can effectively use this tool in your projects when putting together your API endpoints. My name is Bryan and I help other developers level up their web development skills through videos like this one. If you enjoy this kind of content, then go ahead and hit that like button to help the YouTube algorithm recommend my videos to others that might be interested in content like this. Hit the subscribe button if you want to see more videos from me. Hit the notification bell if you want to be annoyed with more notifications, and check out some of the links in the description if you're interested in subscribing to my value packed newsletter or following me on other social platforms like Twitter, where I post more often. With that, let's get into using the API view. First of all, what is the API view and what is it best used for? Django REST Framework has different ways that we can put together views. We have generic views that we can use, we have view sets that we can use, and we have the API view. The generic views and the view sets in Django REST Framework are best designed for putting together API endpoints that perform CRUD operations. They are designed to do this effectively by abstracting a lot of the logic out in order to make putting together these endpoints as easy as possible. These views abstract out a lot of logic, and that means that you can use very few lines of code to put together full CRUD endpoints in your app. The difference with the API view, on the other hand, is that far less is abstracted away with this particular view. You can still use it to create a full CRUD API. The only difference is going to be that you're going to have to write much more code in order to accomplish the same thing that the generic views and the view sets will do for you. So why use the API view? Well, the generic views and the view sets abstract logic based on what you most commonly do when putting together a CRUD API. But things that are far less common won't be abstracted away, and it might be difficult to get these views to do something less common. Like for instance, if you want logic in the view for sending emails, using a Redis cache, sending requests to external APIs, using packages to help accomplish things in your view, like processing payments for example, and so forth. If you need endpoints that do more custom logic like this, then that is where API views really help out. Now that we know what the API views are and when they're most effective, let's see how to put these together. So here I have the Django REST Framework documentation open, and then if you go under API Guide and Views, then here you're going to see class-based views, and it's going to be showing you an example of this API view. And this is an example of using a class-based view, but you can also put these together with the functional views, and you would do that by using the API view decorator, and then you would just pass a list of whatever methods you want to handle, and then inside of the view you can do these if checks with request method equals to whatever request method you want to handle. So now I'm going to flip over to my other screen. This is where I have VS Code open and where I'm going to quickly put together a Django project. And then we're going to be using Django REST Framework. We're going to create API endpoints using the API view. So let's go ahead and do that. So I have Python 3 installed on my system. I'm using Python 3.11. I'm going to put together a virtual environment. And then I'm going to activate that virtual environment. And then I'm going to do a pip install Django REST Framework. This is the only package I need to install. And then I'll just do a pip freeze and requirements.txt. So that way I have everything within this requirements.txt. So there's Django REST Framework and all the packages that it installed because of dependencies that it has itself, one of them being Django. I'm going to clear my terminal. I'm going to do Django admin start project, and I'll name this project API view, and I'll create it in the current directory. And then I'll do Python manage.py start app, and I'll do something like, let's say, products. So we're going to have a products app, and we're going to create endpoints related to products. And then one thing I can do is I can also quickly put together a small product model. So my products are going to have a name, which will be models char field. They're going to have a price, which is going to be an integer field. And then finally, they're going to have a quantity. Then I'll open up my settings. I'll place this products app within here since we have a model. And then to set up REST framework within here, I'm gonna have to put REST framework within my installed apps as well. And then that's all I really need. So with that, I can close up my settings, I can close up this. I can run Python manage.py, make migrations because I made that product model. And then I'll just migrate that to the SQLite database. And then I can run the server. So I'll have that running in the background. So now I'm going to open up my views, and this is where I'm going to put together my API view. So to use the API view, I have to do from REST framework, and then .views, import API view. So this is the class that my view is going to inherit. But this is for the class-based views. So maybe first I'm just going to test out the functional view, just so that we can see that way of putting together API views, and then after that, I'll put it together with the class-based view. So if we go back to the documentation and we scroll over here, we can see how we can do that. So we want to import the API view decorator, and we also want to import response. So I'm going to grab both of these. I'm going to paste them here. And then we're going to define the function, which is going to be products underscore view. And this is going to take in request. And then above it, we're going to use the decorator of API view. And then we're just going to have all of the request methods. So get, post, put, patch, and delete. So now we're going to need a series of if checks. So if request method is get, then we'll do this logic. And then elif request method is post, we'll do this logic. Then I'll just copy this down a few times. So if we have put, patch, or delete. So this way we cover all of these. So we're going to keep things pretty simple. So one thing I'm going to need is for the get, we're just going to get all of the products that we have. Post, we're going to create product. Put is to update product, same with patch. And then delete will be deleting a product. And then I'm also going to need to set up a serializer. So I'm just going to do a model serializer, and then we're going to be utilizing that in here. So from REST framework, I'm going to import serializers. I'm going to set up a class of product serializer. That'll inherit serializers.model serializer. Set up the class of meta. I'm going to have model, which is going to be my product model, which I have to import. And then I'm going to set up the fields, which I'll just do all. So there we go. Simple serializer. So back in here, I can do from .serializers import product serializer, and then I can utilize this serializer. And then on top of that, I'm also going to have to do from .models import product. So now to get all products, I can do products is product objects all, and then those products I could put through the serializer. So I'll do serializer is product serializer, passing in the products, and then I can return a response, and then I'll do serializer.data, and then I'll also have a status code. So status is going to be equal to, and then if we go to the Django REST Framework documentation, here we have status codes. And then these are all status codes that we can send back. So one way that you can do this is I can either do something like status is equal to just the integer 200, or I can do it the more proper way, which is from REST Framework. You're going to import status, and then you'll do status.http 200, okay. So this is just like the exhaustive list of all the different status codes that you have access to when you import this status. So with that, I'm going to create a urls.py. Then from django.urls import path. Set up URL patterns. Set up a path, which is going to be products slash, and then I'm gonna have to import my view. So from views, import products view. I can pass that here, and then I can set up a name of products. Then I have to go to the root urls.py, do a path of API slash, and then I'll include, which I have to import, and I'll include products.urls. So let's check out the server. Everything seems good. So I should be able to retrieve products now. So if I open up Postman, I should be able to send a request to localhost 8000 API products slash, and seems we got an error. And the error is related to this right here. I have to pass also many equals true, which I forgot to do because we're returning multiple products. So with that, if I send the request, there we go. We get a 200 OK, and right now we have an empty array sent back since we don't have any products yet. So let's create an endpoint now where we can create products. So that's going to be this post. So right now the API view, it doesn't have built-in validation for us like the generic views and also the view sets. So we have to do this validation manually. So this is how we can do it. I can do serializer is equal to my product serializer. And then I can do data is request data. Then I could check if serializer dot is valid. And then in this case, I'm going to check if it's not valid, in which case I can return an error response. So I'll return a response, which is going to have serializer.errors. And then I'll send a status of status.http 400 bad request. And then in the case where this is valid, I'm going to continue on. So I'm going to first grab the validated data. So I can do validated data is equal to serializer.validated data. And then once I have the validated data, then I can create. Now one thing I can do is product objects create and then pass in my fields. However, the model serializer, one thing that it allows you to do is it has this create method already created, and then you just have to pass the validated data to this, and then it's going to go ahead and actually create your model. And it does that right over here. So that's the way that I'm going to do that. So back here, instead of doing this, I can just do serializer.create and pass in my validated data. And then after that, I just have to simply return a response with serializer.data, and then status is going to be status.http, and then 201 created in this case, since if you create data in the database, you usually send back a 201. So with that, we can now test out creating this product. So I'm going to open up a new tab. This is going to be a post request to localhost 8000 API products slash. I'll have content type application slash JSON. And then I'll pass some raw data. If I send the request as is, here I see I have validation. So that validation is because of what I set up right over here. So we pass the data through the product serializer, we check if it's valid. If not, then we send back the serializer errors with a 400 bad request. So that's how we can get validation set up very easily. So now we can send these pieces of data. So name, price, and then quantity. If I send this, may not be blank, and this has to be an integer. So I'll send a t-shirt, and then this will have a price of 20 and quantity of say 45. I send this, and now I get back the data. So perfect. Now if I go back to this endpoint, I send off the request, then I also get back a list with this one piece of data, which is now stored in the database. So that worked perfectly. So now let's go back to the code. So we handled the get, we handled the post, but we also have these ones here. Now these ones here, they work slightly differently because typically, right now we have an endpoint like API products slash, except endpoints like these ones, they expect to get something here, something dynamic. And that'll typically be something like an ID, or it might be a slug. Then it'll use that to retrieve which, let's say, product we want to update or delete. So when you set up these sort of CRUD endpoints using an API view, these ones here, you're not really gonna have inside of the same one as like the get and the post. You would have to create a separate function and then have a separate endpoint for these. Then you'd go inside of the URLs, then you'd set up a path, which would be something like product slash, and then maybe the primary key or the slug, whatever it might be. So that's how that would typically work. So with that, I'm gonna remove these, and then I'm also gonna remove these. So now let's go ahead and see how we can set up this API view using a class-based view instead of using this function view. So I'm gonna comment out this code here, and then I'm gonna also comment out this here. And then I'm gonna wanna use this import now. So I'll put that import, say, over here. And then I can set up a class, which will be my product API view. That's gonna inherit API view. So that way I get all the functionality of API view within this product API view. And then this API view, it has all these different attributes. So the common ones that you'll typically use are things like permission classes, maybe authentication classes if you didn't set up default ones, and then maybe renderer, parser classes. So you have a lot of these set up. Now the generic views and the view sets, they're also gonna have things like, let's say, serializer class, but we don't have that sort of thing here because less is abstracted away with the API view. So with that, now let's go ahead and set up the API view using the class-based view. So to do it with the class-based view, you're gonna have functions that you're gonna define, which are gonna be things like get, which will take in self and request. You'll have post, and then put, self request, and then you might receive some dynamic value from the URL, like the primary key or the slug, whatever it might be. And then patch. And delete. So with the API view, these methods that you defined here, they're gonna match the same as the request methods. So a get request will be the method get, post will be post, and so forth. So that's how you use these. And then if we wanted this to be set up in more of a CRUD way, then what I would do is I would maybe do product list create API view, which would have a get and a post. And then I would have a separate class-based view, which would be product retrieve update delete view. And then that would define a get in here, which would accept a primary key. And then it would have the put, patch, and delete. And then I would set up an endpoint for this one and an endpoint for this one. So that's what I would do if I was setting up more of a CRUD API using the API view. And then I could go to the URLs. I could import those API views that I created. So I had product list create API view and product retrieve update delete view. And then here I could do product list create API view dot as view and call that, because this expects to receive a function reference inside of this path. And then you can do that by chaining on this as view on the class-based views. And then I can set up another path, which will be product slash the primary key. And that's going to be this one here with the as view. And then I have to set up a different name. So in that case, I'll just do something like, let's say, product here, and then do product dash list here. Just have these names different. And maybe this one could be product retrieve. Why not? So there we go. Now we have the endpoints set up. So all that's left to do is now implement this logic. So this one here is going to be the exact same as what we did inside of this get. So I'm just going to copy this, paste it here, and then just uncomment these lines and do some formatting. So there we go. We're going to get all the products. We're going to run it through the serializer and return the response. And then the post is going to be the same as what we implemented here. Just going to paste that here, uncomment, and then fix the indenting. So there we go. Now we should be able to test out both listing and creating, and it should still work just the same as when we had the functional view. So going back here, I should be able to retrieve. Yep, I can still retrieve. And now let's create a new product. So I'll do pants. Price will be 60 and quantity can be 30. Send that. And there we go. We created it. And now if I go to list, I should now see 2 products. So that works just like before, except now we're using the class-based view instead. And now let's go implement the logic for the rest of these. So for retrieving, I'm going to do product is equal to product.objects.get, where ID is the primary key. I'll do serializer is my product serializer, passing in the product, and then I'll return my response with serializer data and a status of status HTTP 200 OK. So let's test that out. So I'll create a GET request for localhost 8000 API product / the ID of 1. And there we go. I receive my t-shirt, and then ID of 2 should be my pants. So there we go. Now we have a retrieve endpoint. So next we can do the put. So just like before, I'm going to retrieve the product using the primary key. After that, I'm going to run it through the serializer. And then I'm going to check if not serializer.is valid. I want to make sure the fields are valid. If they're not, I'll return a response with serializer.errors and a status of status HTTP 400 bad request. If my fields were valid, I'm going to grab the validated data. And that's going to be serializer.validated data. And then I can do serializer.update. And that's going to take the instance and the validated data. So we can take a look at that by going to the model serializer. So we previously looked at the create, which receives validated data. And then we also have the update, which receives the instance and the validated data. And based on that, it does an update. So the instance I have here, I can pass that. And then I also have the validated data, so I can pass that. And after that, I can return a response, which is going to be my serializer.data and a status of status.http 200 OK. So with that, we should be able to test out the put request. So I'll update my t-shirt and change it to say a hat. So I'll do content type, application JSON. And let's see what happens first if I send something like this. So let's see what happened. Okay, so what I should have done is data is request.data. And then I'm validating the data that I receive. So that's how this should have worked. And then I should be able to receive the validated data, do the update, and then that should work. So let's try that again. So now I get name, price, quantity. These fields are required. So for the price, I'll do 25. This is going to be a hat. and then I'll have quantity. And for this, I'll do 20. So let's send that off. So now we got name hat, price, quantity. So now if I get product 1, I expect this to now be updated. So now it's a hat. If I list my products, I also now have a hat instead of the t-shirt. So the updating now worked. So let's go back to the code. And then the next one that we have is the patch. Now typically patch requests, you wouldn't expect to need to receive all of the data in the request. You can receive one piece of data, 2, you can receive all of them. Now this logic's a little bit more complicated, so I'm just gonna keep the patch request being the same as the put request, just so I don't spend a lot of time putting together the patch request. And then we're gonna finally just put together this delete. So for the delete, I can do product, objects, filter, where ID is the primary key, and then delete that one. And then just return a response. And then that's just gonna have a status of status HTTP 204 no content. So typically this is how delete requests work. You just delete and then return a 204 status, which is gonna have no data. So let's test that out. So I'm gonna create a new request. It's gonna be a delete request to localhost 8000 API products /2/. So I'm gonna try to delete the product with ID 2. Send that. I got a 204 status. So now if I go to list the products, I should only see the hat. So there we go. Now we've implemented all of the CRUD endpoints using the API view. Now typically you won't be putting together CRUD endpoints using the API view just because there's a lot more logic you have to put together just to get the same sort of implementation that you can get with 2 or 3 lines of code using a different kind of view. But this is just more to show you how to use the API view, and then you could just do much more custom logic inside of each of these sort of request handlers. So that's going to be everything for this video. If you enjoy this kind of content, then go ahead and hit that like button to help the YouTube algorithm recommend my videos to others that might be interested in content like this. Hit the subscribe button if you want to see more videos like this from me. And then hit the notification bell if you want to be annoyed with more notifications, and check out some of the links in the description if you're interested in subscribing to my value-packed newsletter or following me on other social platforms like Twitter, where I post more often. So that'll be everything for this video, and I'll see you in the next one.